Imagine waking up one morning in a country where the roads still lead somewhere, but no one is sure who they lead to anymore. The stones of those roads are Roman. The walls at the edge of the nearest town are Roman. The coins buried in the field your grandfather ploughed are Roman. But the soldiers who laid the stones, who manned the walls, who struck the coins, are gone. They left, and they did not come back. This is the country where the legend of King Arthur was born, not the golden kingdom of shining castles and silver armor and banners snapping in a summer wind, not the world of the round table and the painted shields and the polished stone of Camelot. That kingdom belongs to later centuries, to poets writing 500 or 600 years after the events they pretended to describe. The real Britain, the Britain that made the legend necessary, looked nothing like it. The real Britain was cold, muddy, frightened, and slowly forgetting the world that had made it. Before Arthur could become a legend, Britain had to lose the world that created it. That is where this story has to start. Not with a sword in a stone, not with a crown or a wizard or a round table in a great hall. It has to start with an empire walking away from an island, and an island trying to work out what it had just become. Tonight, we are going to walk into that country. We are going to walk the old Roman roads in the fog of the 5th century. We are going to stand in villages where the Lord is no longer a Roman governor, but a local man with a sword. We are going to watch ships arrive on the eastern coast, and we are going to watch the people on the shore realize that history has just turned a corner. They cannot walk back. And somewhere in that cold and rainy century, we are going to look for a shadow, a war leader, a memory, a man the later world would call Arthur. But we are not going to find him easily, because the harder you look for Arthur, the more the man fades, and the more the country he was supposed to save comes sharply into focus. So, let us begin where the legend itself begins, at the end of the Roman world. For almost 400 years, Britain had been part of something enormous, not a nation, not a kingdom, but an empire. Roman soldiers had arrived in the 1st century, and Roman rule had shaped the island ever since. Towns had been planted along the Thames, along the Severn, along the northern frontier. Long straight roads had been driven through forests that had never seen a straight line in their lives. Stone villas with heated floors had been built in valleys where, a few generations before, people had lived in round houses of thatch and timber. An entire upper class of Britons had learned to speak Latin, to dress like Romans, to worship like Romans, to bury their dead like Romans. This was not an occupation of 100 years. This was the inherited world of 15 generations. For anyone alive in the late 4th century, Rome was simply the way the world was arranged. And then, quietly, almost without warning, Rome began to walk away. The edges of the Roman world were under pressure everywhere at once. The Rhine frontier was cracking. Goths were moving across the Danube. Usurpers were declaring themselves emperors in Gaul, in Spain, in Britain itself. Every time the legions of Britain were pulled across the Channel to fight in one of these emergencies, fewer of them came back. By the first decade of the 5th century, the garrisons were thin. The coin supply was drying up, and the young men who might once have expected to wear a Roman uniform were instead standing guard themselves on the walls of their own towns. Around the year 410, the emperor in distant Italy sent a letter to the cities of Britain. The letter told them, in so many words, that no more soldiers were coming, that they would have to look to their own defense. That letter is the closest thing Britain has to a date for the end of the Roman world, but the end was slower than that. For a generation, the Roman shape of life kept going out of sheer habit. Town councils still met. Bishops still wrote to Rome. Some coins kept circulating, some villas kept being lived in, though the mosaics were patched with rough flooring and the dining rooms were used to store grain. People still called themselves Roman, but the centre had gone. And once the centre goes, everything changes, even when the outside looks the same. This is the world we have to picture now, a Britain where the roads still exist, but the patrols are gone, where the city walls still stand, but the garrisons inside them are local militias of farmers and traders, where the great estates are breaking up because there is no longer a Roman market to sell their grain to, where the church is still organised, still keeping Latin alive, but its bishops are starting to act more like local lords than officers of a continental institution. Imagine a market town in the west of Britain in the year 430. Its forum is quiet. Its public baths have not been heated in a decade because no one knows how to repair the boilers any longer, and the craftsmen who did know died with no apprentices. Its streets are still paved, but weeds are coming up between the stones. A church at one end of the town is busier than the forum ever is now. Outside the walls, the farmers know that if raiders come up the river, there will be no cohort marching out to meet them, and everyone knows it. This is not the end of Britain, but it is the end of Roman Britain, and in the silence left by the empire, new men begin to rise. Because power never really disappears. It only changes shape. When the governors stop arriving, and the tax collectors stop coming, and the army stops marching, someone has to step into the vacuum. Someone has to decide who gets to defend the walls when the signal fires are lit. In most of post-Roman Britain, that someone was a local strongman. He might have been a former Roman officer who had married into a local family. He might have been the descendant of a Romanized British nobleman whose ancestors had run an estate for 10 generations. He might even have been a churchman, a bishop with lands of his own, keeping a kind of order through moral weight when political authority had failed. In the West, in the hills of what would later be called Wales, he was sometimes called a tyrannus, which in this age did not mean a cruel man, but simply a ruler with no higher lord above him. In the north, he might have been called a king. In the south, he might still have claimed to be a Roman magistrate, long after Rome had stopped returning his letters. Whatever they called themselves, these men had one thing in common. They had warriors, a small household band, 10, 20, maybe 100 armed men who ate at their hall, slept under their roof, and rode with them when danger came. This was the real currency of authority in the Britain of the 5th century. Not coins, not Roman parchment. Armed men fed and rewarded by a leader strong enough to hold them. And the halls of those leaders were not the stone palaces of later legend. They were long wooden buildings with steep, thatched roofs, smoke rising through a hole in the gable, a hearth running down the centre of the floor, benches along the walls where warriors slept. The food was barley bread, pork, mutton, porridge, ale, sometimes honey, rarely wine, because the shipping lanes that had once brought wine from Bordeaux were mostly quiet now. Outside the hall, the land looked different too. Old Roman villas were being abandoned, their roofs falling in, their walls quarried by local farmers for building stone. New settlements were appearing in the hills. All across the west of Britain, people were going back to the old hill forts their ancestors had built before the Romans came. They were re-digging the ditches, stacking new timber palisades on top of the old banks, making the height itself do the work that a Roman wall used to do. Forts that had lain quiet for 400 years of Roman peace were suddenly being reoccupied. People were climbing back up to ground their ancestors had climbed down from. That tells us, without any need for a written source, what the people of that age were afraid of. They were afraid of raiders from the sea. They were afraid of neighbours with grudges and armed bands. They were afraid that the roads which had once been safe were no longer safe, and they were right to be afraid. In a world like this, a strong war leader could become more than a man. He could become the memory of order itself. In a country where one strong man with a war band could make the difference between a village being burned and a village being safe, people would remember that man. They would pass stories about him down to their children and grandchildren. They would mix him up with older heroes and make him braver every time and long. After he was dead, the name they gave him would still be spoken around winter fires in villages that had forgotten almost everything else. That is how a war leader becomes a shadow that does not fade. But for now, he is still only a shadow, because the real threat was already gathering on the other side of the sea. Across the grey water of the North Sea, in the long, sandy coastlines of what is now northern Germany, Denmark and the Low Countries, lived a group of peoples the later Britons would lump together under a single word: Saxons. In reality, they were many: Angles, Saxons, Jutes, Frisians, tribes, clans, warrior households. They spoke related Germanic languages. They worshipped the same sky gods. They lived in villages of long timber houses along the estuaries and the coasts. And for generations they had been looking westward across the sea toward the rich green island of Britain. They had been coming for longer than the legends admit. Even in the late Roman period, the eastern coast of Britain had been called the Saxon Shore, and a chain of forts had been built to watch for raiders from exactly these people. Once the Roman garrisons thinned, those raids became bolder. Ships in the mouth of the Thames, ships up the rivers of East Anglia, villages burned, livestock taken, slaves carried back across the water. And then, somewhere in the middle of the 5th century, the raiding became something else. The ships stopped going home. The later British historians, writing bitterly generations afterwards, blamed a single catastrophic decision. They told a story of a British ruler remembered by the half-Roman, half-British name of Vortigern, who faced a threat from the north, from the Picts beyond the old Roman wall, and who decided to hire Saxon warriors to fight for him. He gave them land in the east along the coast in return for their swords. For a while the arrangement worked. Then the payments failed, or the demands of the Saxons rose, or both, and the allies became enemies. The warriors already in Britain began to take by force the land and the food they had been promised. More of their kinsmen arrived. What had begun as a payment had become an invasion. How much of that story is history and how much is memory shaped by later anger, we cannot entirely know. But something like it did happen. The eastern and southern coasts of Britain began to see permanent settlement, villages with a new kind of house, a new kind of pottery, a new kind of burial, a new kind of god. In one generation there were pockets. In 2 generations, whole districts. In 3 generations, parts of eastern Britain were no longer Britain in any recognizable sense. They had become, although they did not yet know it, England. For the Britons watching this happen, it was terrifying. The danger was not only that enemies came with weapons, the deeper fear was that Britain itself was changing name, language, and memory. Imagine a British farming family in the east of the country in the year 470. Their neighbours now spoke a language they could not understand. Their neighbours worshipped gods whose names they did not recognise. Their neighbours buried their dead with swords and drinking cups instead of laying them in shrouds in Christian ground. Their neighbours, slowly and steadily, were winning, not by one great battle, but by arriving and staying and marrying their own and working the same land and burying their dead in it year after year, generation after generation. This was the great slow grief of post-Roman Britain. The fear that an entire people was being replaced over the long, patient span of lifetimes. The fear that, by the time you were an old woman, the village you had grown up in would be called by a different name in a different tongue by people who had never heard of your grandfather. In that kind of fear, a saviour becomes a need, not a fantasy. So where does Arthur fit into this broken world? Not yet. Not quite yet. Before we look for him, we have to understand the life of the people he was supposed to save, because the Britain of the 5th and 6th centuries was not only about halls and warbands and enemy ships, it was also, mostly, about the slow daily business of staying alive. If Arthur lived in this world, he did not ride through marble halls, he rode through mud, smoke, hunger, and fear. Picture a village in Western Britain in the late 5th century. It sits in a hollow of land, near a small river ringed on one side by the edge of a forest, and on the other by fields of barley, oats, and rye. The houses are long and low, their walls are made of upright timbers woven with wattle, and then daubed with a thick mixture of mud, straw, and cow dung that dries pale in the sun. Their roofs are thick thatch, heavy with rain, patched every year with new reeds. There is no chimney. Smoke from the central hearth curls up through the rafters. Everything inside smells faintly of wood smoke for all of your life. Inside a house like this, the floor is packed earth, sometimes strewn with rushes. In the centre, a stone hearth glows with a small fire, kept burning from morning until the last sleeper settles down at night. Around the hearth are the simple tools of a life measured not in coins but in seasons: wooden stools, clay cooking pots, a few iron knives, precious because iron is precious, a hand quern for grinding grain, a loom leaning against the wall where the woman of the house weaves wool into the cloth that will clothe the family. At the far end of the house, animals share the space: a cow or two, a few goats, sometimes pigs. Their warmth rises through the building in winter. Their smell never leaves it. This is simply the way houses are arranged in an age when every animal is a small piece of the difference between surviving the winter and not. The people wear clothes of wool and linen dyed in earth colours: brown, grey, muted green, the occasional dull red from madder root. Shoes are of leather, tied at the ankle with thongs. A cloak pinned with a round brooch is the most important garment because it is the coat, the blanket, and sometimes the mattress of the person who owns it. Their food is simple: bread baked on flat stones by the fire, porridge made from oats or barley, sweetened in good times with a little honey, stew thickened with roots and greens, cheese of sheep's milk, ale brewed in the house, safer to drink than water from the nearest stream. They eat together from wooden bowls, sitting on low stools around the hearth. Children share the same pot as their parents. A dog lies at the edge of the firelight. This is the life almost everyone lived. Whether Arthur existed or not, this is the daily shape of Britain in his age. Small houses, small fields, small flocks. A world built around the hearth and the hand, but it is not a world without fear. A few miles from the village, over the ridge, the monks of a small monastery are ringing a handbell for the morning prayers. Their church is a rectangle of timber and thatch, no more impressive than the hall of a minor lord. Inside it, a single wooden cross stands at the eastern end. Beside the altar, there is a small iron box holding the most precious objects the community owns: a copy of the Gospels on vellum, a fragment of bone from a local saint, a silver cup. The monks are few. Some of them copy manuscripts in the long hours of daylight. Others work in the fields. Others teach a handful of boys the Latin letters that will, in 100 years, be almost the only link between this country and its Roman past. In an age when there are no schools, these monasteries are the schools. In an age when there are few books, they are the libraries. In an age when most people cannot write, they are the memory. They are the places where the name of a war leader, half remembered from a rough oral tradition, will one day be ink on a page. Back in the village, a messenger is coming up the road. He's riding a small horse, not much more than a pony by later standards. His cloak is mud spattered. His face is drawn. He rides straight to the house of the Lord, and by the time he has dismounted, men are already drifting across the village to hear the news. News travels this way, in this world, not in books, not in letters, in the voice of a tired rider. The news, too often in these years, is the same kind of news. A raid on a neighbouring district, a chain of villages burned along a river, a band of Saxon warriors seen pressing further west than they have ever come before. A local lord dead, killed in a skirmish, leaving his own small warband broken. The lord in the hall will listen. He will call his men, and within a day he will ride out with his warriors to join a larger band, commanded by a greater lord, answering the call of someone greater still. Somewhere at the top of that chain stands a leader who can gather, if he is lucky, the warriors of many districts at once. He's not a king in the later sense. He is at best a dux bellorum, a leader in war, a man who, when the enemy comes in force, holds the line for a time. Some ancient sources centuries later would give that role a name. That name was Arthur. But we are not ready to say it yet. We still have to look at the men who fought. Could one man really hold Britain together? To answer that, we have to understand who the warriors of post-Roman Britain actually were. Because when people say the word knight, they usually imagine the knights of later legend. Men in full plate armour, riding great heavy destriers, fighting with lances under painted banners, living by a code of chivalry in the great courts of the 12th and 13th centuries. That world is real. But it is 600 or 700 years too late for this story. The knights of later legend belonged to the Middle Ages, but Arthur's warriors, if they existed, belonged to a rougher, older Britain, closer to Rome's ruins than to the castles of chivalry. Picture them instead like this. A warrior in 5th or 6th century Britain was, above all, a man in the service of a lord. His wealth was not a castle, but a place at the lord's table. His prestige was his weapons, his horse if he had one, and the arm rings his lord had given him in reward for loyalty and courage. He wore a tunic of wool, trousers bound with leather strips, boots of hide. Over that he might wear a shirt of chainmail if he was wealthy or lucky. More often he wore a leather jerkin, perhaps reinforced with small plates. On his head, a helmet of iron, often an inheritance from a father or an uncle. In his hand, a spear, because the spear was the weapon of almost every warrior of this age. At his belt, a sword if he was of high rank, a long knife if he was not, and on his arm a round wooden shield, faced with leather, painted in a single colour or a simple pattern. He rode a horse smaller than we expect, closer to the size of a modern large pony, tough, hairy, used to the weather. He fought on horseback when he could. He fought on foot when he had to. His battles were not the vast organised affairs of later centuries. They were sudden, brutal, and often short. A warband against a warband, a charge, a shock, a collision of shields, and then, if the line broke, a pursuit. He trained in the open field outside the hall, young men practicing against each other with wooden staves in place of blades, older warriors watching, correcting, remembering their own campaigns. And when the call came, he rode with 20 or 40 of his companions behind a leader he had sworn himself to, toward whatever smoke was rising on the horizon. If there was an Arthur, he commanded men like these. Not plate-armoured knights on tournament horses, post-Roman British warriors in boiled leather and mail on small hardy mounts, with spears and round shields, riding out of a wooden hall at dawn through a wooden gate into a world of mud and fog. That is the image to hold. Forget the marble, forget the tournament, keep the fog and the shields and the smell of wet horse. And somewhere inside this world, the later writers tell us, a leader arose. Somewhere inside this violent century, later writers remembered a British leader who stood against the Saxons. His name may have been Arthur, or Arthur may have become the name given to several memories combined into one. The oldest writer to hint at him was not a historian in the modern sense. He was a British monk named Gildas, writing in the middle of the 6th century, probably within living memory of the events he mentions. Gildas does not name Arthur, but he does speak with a burning bitterness of the ruin of his country, of the Saxon advance, and of a time when a British leader rallied his people and won a series of victories that, for a generation, pushed the invaders back. He names one battle especially, fought at a place he calls Mount Badon, a battle, he says, at which the Britons won a great victory, and after which the tide of the war seemed, for a time, to turn. Gildas does not tell us who the British commander was at Badon, but he tells us there was one. He tells us there was a man or men who held the line when the line most needed holding. Generations later, other writers began to fill in the silence. A monk named Nennius, writing around the 9th century, listed 12 battles fought by a British leader against the Saxons. At the head of that list, he placed a name, Arthur. Nennius did not call him a king, he called him Dux Bellorum, a leader in war, a commander whom the kings of the Britons chose to follow because he was their best chance against the invaders. By then, the war leader of the fog and the hillforts had become something else, something larger, something none of his real companions, if he had any, would have recognized. But at the bottom of all that later splendor, there seems to be a real memory, not a proof, not a certainty, a memory. The memory of a time when Britain, against all expectation, did not simply fall, when the Saxon advance was checked for perhaps 2 generations, when the old British world held on in the West, in Wales, in Cornwall, in Cumbria, in pockets of the north, long enough to pass on its language, its stories, its faith, and its pride to the people who would carry them forward. Someone, somewhere inside that holding, was remembered as the reason for it. Was Arthur a king, a commander, or a memory? Perhaps he was all three. A real man whose name has been half lost, a commander of war bands, remembered clearly enough for monks to write him down, and then, as the centuries passed and the stories grew, a memory that absorbed older heroes and newer hopes, until he became the name under which all the best of the lost British world could be remembered. Whatever the truth of his life, the Battle of Badon was real, and we can, in careful imagination, stand on that hill. Imagine it on the morning the Britons climbed it, a hill in the west of the country, chosen because of its height, its ditches, its slopes. The old bank and ditch of an ancestral hill fort has been refortified, the timbers replaced, the palisade patched. The British warriors are drawn up along the ridge. Their leader, in a good mail shirt, rides along the line speaking to the captains of each contingent. The men are from many districts. Some speak a British Latin, still close to the old imperial tongue. Others speak only the British language of their grandfathers, but they all know that the Saxons are close, and that this hill is where, today, they are going to choose to meet them. Below, in the valley, the Saxon host is gathering, spearmen massed around their chieftains, banners of wolf and boar and raven, the jingle of harness, the shouts of captains, the noise of a host preparing to climb. The British leader has chosen well. The slope will tire the enemy. The ditches will break their charge. The British spears, set in a close line, will do the rest if the line holds. And that is all we can see, because the historical record closes over this battle like mist over the valley below it. We do not know how many hours it lasted. We do not know how many fell. We do not know what the commander on the ridge actually said. We only know that afterwards the Britons believed they had won something, that the Saxon advance slowed for a generation or more, and that in the long memory of their people a shadow was forming on that ridge, a shadow that would one day walk out of the fog and into every great hall of every later century. From that day, a war leader began to become a myth. The process was slow. It always is when a legend is being born. First, there was the oral tradition. Warriors who had ridden in Baden or in the other campaigns of the late 5th and early 6th centuries told their stories in halls and around hearths. Their sons told them with a little more colour. Their grandsons told them with a little more colour again. A lost horse became a wondrous horse. A good spear became a magical spear. A brave companion became a hero with a name that rang in verse. Not lies exactly, but polishing. The sharp edges of ordinary life wearing down into the smooth, shining shape of story. Then, in the monasteries, monks began to write. They wrote in Latin on vellum by the flickering light of tallow candles in small rooms where the winter wind leaked between the shutters. They put the name Arthur into their lists of battles, their lists of saints' lives, their lists of wonders. By the 9th century, Arthur was firmly on the page, a war leader, a defender of Christian Britain against pagan invaders. By the 12th century, he had become something else entirely. A writer named Geoffrey of Monmouth sat down to produce a book he called The History of the Kings of Britain. Geoffrey was not writing history as we would mean the word today. He was stitching together older traditions, monastic chronicles, oral stories, and a great deal of his own imagination. He gave Arthur a father, a mother, a wife. He gave him a wizard, Merlin. He gave him a magical sword. He made him a conqueror not only of Saxons but of kings in Gaul, in Ireland, in Norway, in Rome itself. And then he killed him on a last battlefield at the hands of a traitor and carried him away on a ship to an island called Avalon, from which the old stories whispered he might one day return. Geoffrey's book was copied, translated, retold, and devoured. It spread from England to France, from France across Christendom. French poets picked up the story and added knights, romances, and adventures. They added Lancelot. They added the Grail. They added the Round Table, where no seat was higher than another. They moved Arthur's court out of the fog of the 5th century and set it in the castles of their own age, with their own tapestries, their own armour, their own manners. By the time the story reached its final medieval form, Arthur was a king of stone towers and silver trumpets, a king in the image of the nobility of the high Middle Ages, the real Britain of the 5th century, of smoke and hillforts and round shields and wet cloaks and Latin bells ringing in small wooden churches, had been painted over, but it had not been destroyed, because under every layer of the legend, the older country was still there. The old stone roads, the old hall in the hills, the old warband in the fog, the old fear of ships on the horizon, the old hope that, somewhere, a leader strong enough would stand between the people and the worst of the storm. The real Arthur may be lost, but the world that needed him was very real. That, in the end, is the strangest and most moving thing about this whole story. We cannot prove beyond doubt that a man named Arthur walked the roads of post-Roman Britain. We cannot prove his campaigns. We cannot prove his battles. The arguments will never fully end. But we can prove with absolute certainty that the country which invented him was real. We can prove that Rome left Britain in the early 5th century. We can prove that the towns shrank and the villas fell and the coins dried up. We can prove that local lords rose in the vacuum. We can prove that the Saxons came first as raiders, then as settlers. We can prove that there was a period of British resistance in which the invading tide was slowed. We can prove that the people of Britain went from being Romanized Christians to being, over several centuries, two different peoples, speaking different languages, remembering different ancestors, carrying different names. And we can prove that, out of that long and painful transformation, the people who lived through it needed a hero, someone who had stood between them and the end of the world as they knew it, a name to say by the winter fire, a name to give their sons, a name that meant we were not only victims, someone held the line, someone bought us the time we needed to survive. That need was the soil. The legend was the flower that grew from it. So when you imagine Arthur now, imagine him carefully. Do not imagine him in shining armor on a white horse, with a golden crown and a jeweled sword. That is the Arthur of the great French romances, painted by poets who had never seen a 5th century hill, who had never smelled a peat fire or woken in a timber hall at dawn. Imagine him instead in a dark wool cloak, on a small, tough horse, riding along a broken Roman road in the mist of a western morning. His mail shirt is old, repaired, worn at the shoulders from long use. His helmet is simple, his shield is round, plain, battered. 20 men ride with him. They have been awake since before dawn. The hooves of their horses fall softly on the turf beside the stones. At the next ridge they will stop and look and wait for news. That man, or whoever the real man was, or whoever the many men were who together left behind his shadow, spent his life doing the slow, hard work of defending a country that was already slipping out of history. He did not save the Roman world. He did not stop the long change that would turn half of Britain into England. He did not build Camelot. He did not ride under silk banners. He did not end his days in a stone throne room under stained glass windows. What he did, or what his memory did, was refuse to let the story of his people end in silence. Because when England finally grew into itself, fully Christian, fully English, powerful and proud, it was not the names of its own early kings that it took for its greatest legend. It was the name of the man who had fought against them. That is the mystery at the heart of the Arthur story. England embraced the hero of the people England replaced. It made him its own. It gave him stone castles and shining armor. But underneath the costume, Arthur is still a British war leader from the age of smoke and hillforts, standing on a ridge in the fog, with a round shield and a tired horse, looking down at the ships on the river and the columns of smoke on the horizon. That is the man we have been walking toward all this time. This is not the story of Camelot. This is the story of the broken Britain that made Camelot necessary. The roads of that Britain are still under our feet. Some of them are now motorways. Some of them are now lanes between hedges. But the stones are in places the same stones. The hill forts are still there, green under the grass, if you know where to look. The names of the rivers in the west of the island are older than English. They are the words the Britons used in the age of Arthur, or of whoever Arthur was, to name the water they drank and the places they loved. Those names survived because someone, somewhere, held the line long enough for them to be passed on. We do not know who he was. We do not know for certain that any single man was ever the one, but we know that the land remembered him. And as long as a country, any country, feels the fear of being overrun or the hope of being saved, The shadow that Britain saw on the ridge at Baden will keep walking back into our stories. He will wear different armour in different ages, he will carry different swords, but he will still be that small, dark figure in the fog on a tired horse. On a road whose stones are older than his own name, he will still be Arthur, and the broken, brave, frightened, stubborn country that needed him will still be there behind him, in the smoke, in the rain, in the ringing of a small bell from a wooden church, in the quiet, patient work of survival that made the legend not only possible, but necessary. That is the real world behind the legend. That is what Britain was really like in the age of King Arthur.